Today in Roach Reflections I want to talk about the very basics of trotting for roach. Trotting for roach is a huge subject and I'm going to touch on it a number of times over the coming weeks as I do more of these videos. But I'm going to go right back to the beginning. Way back in the late 60s when I started to fish regularly, I had just a 5-foot Woolworths rod and initially an ancient, probably Victorian brass fly reel with some line on it. That was useless, so when a mate of mine got a cheap fixed spool reel, the cheapest Daiwa one, I quickly followed suit, and now I could cast further than I could do anything else. But the good thing about that was I could cast a little way out in a fairly wide shallow pool on the river piddle, and I could get the float to go in a sort of straight line with the bait near the bottom and catch dace and small trout. So that basic idea of trotting, I got that very early on. I had books from people like Bernard Venables, Mr. Crabtree, Fishing in All Waters, Keith Linsell and Trevor Hoosby book, and I read those and I saw the basics of casting in and getting a float to go down in a straight line. And initially I didn't feed the swim or anything like that, I just fished a bit of bread paste. Within a year or so I got a 7-foot spinning rod, nice light action Woolworths one again, and that helped. A bit better line control, slightly better reel. Following year I got up to an 11-foot fiberglass Edgar Seeley rod, again better control, had a better reel there, the very cheapest Mitchell, and I was getting the hang of feeding and casting and getting the float to go down. I had different floats by now, and so it went on. But the first big lesson when it came to roach, although I'd caught big roach on Wareham Quay and I caught them out of the piddle, in both cases I was catching them out of a back eddy of some description, so I wasn't really trotting for them as putting the float into the eddy and fishing it around the eddy. But the first real lesson was when I was 15, just before Christmas in 1972, and my mate Phil and I were fishing just above Wareham Bridge. I think I was fishing from the slipway and he was fishing from the actual buttress there by what we call chain pump, which is where the boat hire is nowadays. I think there was a boat hire back then, but there wasn't anything very formal. I don't think there was a shed or anything. And the river was fishing well. It was late November. River had a tinge of colour, nice steady tide. River was full of dace and roach. And I'd fished a fairly light stick float. I haven't got that stick float anymore, but I think it was a Drennan, a very early Drennan one, taking probably about 4 number 4, 5 number 4, something like that. Phil fished above me. I don't know what float he used. He might have used a pacemaker, taking about 4 BB, and he bulked his shot about 15 inches from the hook with one dropper shot, and I fished this spread out shotting pattern. And at the end of the session, I don't think it was a very long session, maybe 4 hours, I'd got about 40 odd dace and 8 roach, with the best roach all around half a pound, and the total weight was about 10 pounds. Phil had also got about 10 pounds, but he'd got about 7 or 8 dace and all the rest were roach. Now it was possible that he was on the roach and I wasn't. I was just getting the edge of the roach shoal and I was getting more of the dace. But we noted, we figured it out between the two of us, that our bait presentation was very different. He was holding it back the float. I was just running the float through, catching the dace. So the dace wanted it run through. The roach, he was holding it back that much more. A year or so later, by now we were senior members of the fishing club and we were starting to do well in matches. We'd already qualified for the team when we were 15, so really keen, had some ability, not a massive amount, but we had some ability. And there was an older angler called Bill Smith, who was a Brummie, moved down to Dorset, and he was a super bloke, really helped people, very, very fair, which is more than I can say for one or two of the other senior members who were downright nasty as far as I'm concerned. I've got some not very good memories of them, but Bill was a real gentleman, really. If he thought there was something that was not right, he'd speak up about it. He'd have made a good shop steward, if you like. Anyway, like I say, somewhere around about 1974, and I was starting to break my way into the fishing club senior team, as did a couple of my mates, Phil and Richard as well. One day he said to me, I need to teach you how to hold a float back properly. We're going to go up above Wareham Bridge on the stages there, and I'm going to get you holding back that float. It's going to make a difference to your fishing. And that's what he did over certainly one session, and the penny was dropping now. I started to fish a bit heavier sometimes if I wanted to hold back the bait, and this was a really useful skill. And over the years I've done this probably thousands of times now on the Stour and the Froome, learning how to put that float through right. People will say, oh well, you need a centre pin. Well, you don't need a centre pin, but you do need to control how the float goes through. And in filming what I've been doing, although I've yet to get the real footage that I want to show you for this, what we're noticing when we have managed to get a camera focused on a float is that the bites, and I'm seeing some of these bites anyway, but seeing even more with a camera zoomed in on it, the bites from the roach often develop over 2 or 3 feet of the float travelling down the river. So a sensitive float, even in quite heavy water, can make a difference. There's a limit to how sensitive you can go, but it's an important skill. I'm going to look at a couple of clips here of swims on the Stour. One is not far above Sturminster Newton Bridge. It's not a fantastic area for roach, but there's roach there. Haven't fished it this season for one reason and another, mainly the lockdown and restrictions, floods and so on. But towards about a year ago, the back end of last season, I fished it, and I fished it before that, and I filmed what I did several times. And on the face of it, this first swim, which is about 4 swims up from the bridge, looks very straightforward. The water's deepening as it comes into the swim, at the head of the swim, because it's coming off the shallows from the Sturminster Mill pool, which is an enormous great pool. And as it comes off those shallows, like I say, it's steadying up. And to look at it initially, you think the current is going dead straight down the river. But it's not, because there's a slight kink just above the swim. And it goes looking downstream, angle slightly to the left. It hits the current under water is hitting the far bank and then kicking back across the river. And you don't see this on the surface as much as underneath. So when you try and get the float to go in a straight line, and because it's deepening up, you want to hold it back, you're finding the float tracks in towards your bank quite a bit more than you would want ideally. It's just one of those things that's what it's doing. You still catch fish out of there. I can't say I've ever really slaughtered them there, but I've caught plenty of roach, and mostly fairly small ones, as we can see in this clip. But it's worth noting what's happening underwater. So in trying to get the float to do what you want, it's not always as easy as it would look. This final clip is at just below Wimborne Bypass. We've got the opposite thing here. Above Wimborne Bypass Bridge, if we go up about 100, maybe 150 yards, there's a kink, and looking downstream, this one's going to the right. And because of that, the current is pulling away, going across the river slightly, and then lining up in the bridge. But what that means is below the bridge, on that south bank, slightly steadier water on the inside, and as you go further out, it's getting faster. There's a hint of a crease further down into what we call the Roach Bay. There's much more of a crease and some real slack water on the inside. But what that means is the current is working in your favour. It's trying to hold the float further out. It will still, as you hold it back and ease it through, it will still tend to come in towards your bank a bit, but not diabolically, like on the Sturminster bit there. And there are plenty of other swims where it does that. So given a favourable wind off your back, it's quite easy to put a float through in a straight line. And that straight line is important. I'm not convinced big roach like the bait slanting across the current. They get suspicious of it. They want it to follow the line of the current. So that's what you're trying to do, and you're trying to get that speed right. And it, like I say, it doesn't matter what reel you use, whether it's a pin or a fixed spool. What does matter is you get that speed right. And I like to think of it as popping the bait into the roach's mouth, which sounds good. So I let it run through to the killing ground, then about 2 or 3 yards above the killing ground where you'll get in the bites, I lean back on that float and start to put it through really carefully. Once it gets past that, I'll probably still let it run through to see if there's any stragglers, but not so much of a killing ground further down. Hope I've got you thinking as ever. Should be plenty more to come fairly soon. All these wet days with flooded rivers, lockdowns, freezing cold conditions predicted for the weekend yet again. Please click like and subscribe, and it's cheerio from me for now.